Welcome to my eBiology teacher. I'm Doc Miller, and today we are talking about the intro to biology. What is biology? What does it all mean? And we can really kind of boil it down to the science of life. But this is probably the very first step. We're going to take some baby steps today into understanding really what is biology and what does it all entail and what is it that you really need to know. And we are going to answer a question that people have been trying to answer for years and years and years. What is life? Right? So let's go ahead and get started. As you can see on our screen here, we've got some objectives. These are the things that we want to get done today. We want to be able to relate biology to our daily lives because that's obviously important. We want to know why we need to know all this stuff. We want to talk about what classifies a living thing, what things have to be there for it to be living. We want to talk about how things are organized as far as what are the building blocks of life, sort of. And then we want to talk about some distinguishing differences between some of the major concepts we're going to talk about today. So let's go ahead and get started. First of all, there are three main branches of science. And of course, we're talking about biology, which is the study of life. We're talking about living things here. Another branch of science is going to be physical science, and that includes both physics and chemistry. And really, when we talk about physical science, we're talking about matter and energy, atoms and molecules and energy and movement, and that's all physics and chemistry. Now, to say that we're not going to talk about that would be a lie. We have to really understand what matter is and what energy is to understand how life really happens. So make sure that you don't sort of say, oh, we don't have to think about physical science. Well, these may be different branches, but they certainly connect at some point. We're going to be making those connections throughout the year. And then, of course, you have the third branch of science called Earth-Space Science, and that would be about Earth and space. We're talking about geology, meteorology, astronomy. Those all fall under that category. So now that we understand that, let's talk more specifically about biology. After all, this is a biology class, so that's probably the thing we want to spend the most time on. Biology is the study of life, and if we knew a little bit about Greek and Latin or etymology, how words get their names, we could look at the word bio, which actually means life, and we can look at the suffix ology, which would tell us that it's the study of something. So biology would be the study of life. All right, so that makes that makes sense. Now, biology is a huge spectrum. It covers all of the study of life, and that can be subdivided and subdivided again. For example, we can talk about zoology, which is a subset of biology where we study about animals. But we could take that even further and talk about anatomy and physiology and medicine, and we could even take the different animals and put them into different categories. So we could do mammalogy, which would be the study of mammals, or ichthyology, the study of fish. We could talk about all kinds of, etymologies, the study of bugs, whatever. Then we can go to another one, botany. Botany is a subset of biology. We're studying plants. We could even, divide that more. Genetics is a study, heredity, ecology is a study of the environment, and we could just go on. And medicine is a biological science. So you can't think of biology as one thing. It's a huge thing that encompasses all things from all over the place. So biology, what we're going to study are the very basics, but the basics that we study are a part of every single one of those other things that we talked about, zoology and botany and whatnot. So to understand the study of life, we need to define one other term. What is life? Right? Now, I've been teaching for a while, and I always ask that question, and it never ceases to amaze me. No one can really sort of say it, because it's a hard thing to define. What is life? Well, wow, that's tough. So let's take a look at how we define life. All living things have 7 distinct traits, and all living things have all 7. Okay, so in other words, I can't have an organism that has 6 of the 7. If it's got 6 of the 7, then it's not living. It's got to have all 7. And those 7 characteristics are cellular organization, reproduction, heredity, metabolism, homeostasis, responsiveness, and growth and development. We're going to talk about each one of those and what it means in a minute. So really what we're doing today is talking about what is life, because we already know that biology is the study of life. But before we look at each one of those separately, I want to show you how life is sort of categorized. And we're going to do it through what we call the hierarchy. Now, before we talk about a hierarchy, let's explain what a hierarchy is. Let's do the hierarchy of professional football, all right? The very top level of professional football would be the NFL. That's where everybody aspires to be. That's where everybody wants to be. But if we go one level down, we're talking about college football. And one level down from that would be high school football. And one level down from that would be middle school. And then one level down would be Little League, right? Well, notice that when you get to middle school, most of the players that make up a middle school team were Little League players. And when you get to high school, most of the high school players were middle school players. And when you get to college, most of the college players were high school players. And when you get to the professional league, most of those were high school players. So each level builds up and is made up of the previous layer, okay? That's the way the hierarchy of life is. It starts with these smaller units that build their way up. And at each step, it's made up of the previous step, and it's getting more and more complex or more and more specific as we go up. If we talk about life, the first thing we're going to do is start with the atom. The atom is not living. It is the smallest piece of matter there is that's still that type of matter. Okay, that's sort of complicated, but we'll get into that later. If I take some atoms and I put them together, I end up with a molecule. So we take atoms to build molecules. And I can take molecules, which is 2 or more atoms, and build macromolecules. And these are really, really big molecules that have a very specific job or function. If I take some macromolecules, I can make these little things called organelles. And these are little bitty structures inside a cell that sort of do little things. Now notice, we haven't started talking about life yet, because life doesn't happen until we reach the cell level. At the cell level, when we reach a cell, the cell is actually alive. And that's the first step on the hierarchy of life where we actually have life. A cell is the first thing in this whole list that meets all 7 of the criteria that we started with. Okay, and a cell it has the ability to reproduce and has heredity and has cellular organization and all those things we talked about. If I take a whole bunch of cells that have some things in common, I put them together for a common purpose, they create what we call a tissue. A tissue is a whole bunch of cells that are alike, that do basically the same thing. And if I take tissue, I can make up a structure or an organ that does a specific job. Then I can take those organs, put them together with like organs, and make an organ system. And that organ system, for example, if I take a heart with some arteries and some veins and some capillaries and blood and put them all together, that makes up a cardiovascular system, and it helps circulate blood throughout the body. But if I take the cardiovascular system and add a respiratory system and an endocrine system and a digestive system and all these other systems, I create what we call an organism. And that's a multi-cell, that's got more than one cell, a multicellular thing that is itself living, and it's made up of little living cells. Okay, a little complicated, but you see how each step is made up of the step before it. So we're getting more and more specific and more specialized and more complex as we go. So now that we've covered the hierarchy of life, we can start to talk about the distinct characteristics of life. Okay, remember that list of 7. You're going to need to know not only the hierarchy, but you're also going to need to know these characteristics. Because what if you run into something and you go, gee, I wonder if that's alive? Well, if you know these 7, you'll be able to check it out. First, cellular organization. Well, all living things are made up of cells. If something is one cell, then it's called unicellular, and if it's got multiple cells, then it's multicellular. Now, a single cell is living, so you can have single-celled organisms. That's totally legal. Now, a cell is the smallest unit of life, and what cells do is provide organization, and they can do special things depending on what the organism needs. For example, in the human body, you've got muscle cells that contract and relax so that we can move, but those cells are different than the ones in our brain or in our nervous system, because the ones in our nervous system are sending messages. They don't have to contract and relax. That's not what they do. They send messages. So those cells are different. They're organized differently. They have different components in them, and that's what makes a multicellular organism unique. It's made up of different types of cells, and they have special functions. I want to warn you, though, some people get the word organized and complex kind of mixed up. They mean different things. Just because this little guy right here in the blue, this single-cell organism, is only one cell, doesn't mean it's not complex, because if we look in there, it's got those little organelles, and those organelles are doing different things to keep that cell alive. That cell has all 7 of the characteristics of life, just like you do. Okay, so even though it's only one cell, it still meets all the 7 criteria of life, starting with cellular organization. The next 2 are reproduction and heredity. And some people consider these the same thing, because you really can't have one without the other. Reproduction is simply the ability to produce offspring. And you have sexual reproduction, which is where you have 2 organisms combined to form one, okay, or more than one. And then you have asexual reproduction. Now, a little quick SAT note here. If you ever see a word that you know, but it has the letter A before it, A usually means not or without. So if something is sexual, we know what that means. If something is asexual, it means without or not sexual, meaning that it can reproduce by itself or non-sexually. And that's totally okay. If it can reproduce, it can reproduce. But what we know is that when things reproduce, they pass off their traits from the parent to the offspring. And we also know that DNA is the molecule that brings that information along to the party. So let's think about this for a minute. If all living organisms can reproduce, and when they reproduce, they pass on their traits, and to pass on traits, you have to pass on DNA, we know that all living things have DNA because they have heredity. So that's kind of a neat little thing. You don't think about it, but a paramecium, a little single-celled thing, it has DNA just like you do. A fern, a plant, the fish in the fish tank, the hamsters, they all have DNA too. It's not just a human thing, and their DNA is just as unique as yours. All right? So we have cellular organization, we have reproduction, we have heredity, we now have metabolism. And metabolism is the sum of all the chemical reactions within an organism. Really, we're talking about the ability to convert energy and use it for what we need it. Digesting food, filtering and excreting waste, these are all metabolic functions. These are all things that our body does. And like I said, all organisms have to be able to process energy. We have to take in food to get the energy that we need to carry on the processes of life. All organisms do this. They may not do it like we do, where we go to KFC and eat a chicken wing, but they do in their own way. For example, plants. Plants absorb sun, and they form their own energy source through the form of glucose and photosynthesis, which, by the way, we'll talk about later. So that's one thing that all living organisms have, and all living organisms have the ability to maintain homeostasis. Now, let's do another little Greek breakdown here. Homeo means same, and stasis means status or condition. So put it together, and it means same condition or same status. Homeostasis means to be able to keep everything the same, and more specifically, be able to maintain our own internal environment. All right. Now, this includes being able to, for some of us, maintain our own body temperature, or to keep foreign objects out, or to fight off objects that happen to get into our cells or into our body. And here's the connection, because a lot of times people will combine these two ideas, that metabolism and homeostasis are kind of the same thing. Actually, we maintain homeostasis through metabolism. All those little chemical reactions that happen in metabolism help us to maintain homeostasis. All right, so that's kind of a connection there. All of those living things that have these chemical processes, the breaking down of food and making energy, we use those chemical processes to maintain that internal balance we need to survive. All right, so we've got cellular organization, reproduction, heredity, metabolism, homeostasis. Now we go to responsiveness. Yes, responsiveness. Now, if somebody were to come across and smack you across the face, chances are you smack back. The first smack was a stimulus, and a stimulus is anything that causes a response. Now, we don't think of a tree as being that responsive, okay? But think about it. It really does. If a tree isn't getting enough water, then what will happen is its roots will start to grow deeper in the ground, trying to find water deeper in the soil. Or when it gets cold, the leaves fall off the tree. That's the tree's response to the change in weather. We think of response as something happens and we quickly respond. It doesn't always happen that way. Just because something doesn't respond lightning quick like a cat doesn't mean that it's not responding. Okay, so all organisms have the ability to maintain that homeostasis, and they have to be able to respond to those outside conditions. And those abilities differ. Some organisms are quick to react, some are not. So even though a tree can't move like we think it moves, if it gets thirsty, it doesn't uproot itself and walk to the nearest water fountain. It certainly has its own ways of responding. If there's not a lot of water, it does different things. Okay? Now, the last characteristic of life is growth and development. Organisms change over time. We know that. We know that because if we look at you and we look at a picture of you from kindergarten, there's some drastic differences. As cells reproduce in multicellular organisms, the organism tends to get bigger. When we talk about growth, we're really talking about size and complexity. But as more cells form, the ability of these cells to carry out specific functions increases, and that's development. Development is the ability of an organism to get more specific into what it can do. A prime example of that is, let's say you want to be a runner on the track team. What you do, you don't go to the weight room and start working out your upper body a whole bunch to get those arms real strong. No, because you're trying to run. I mean, you're not going to forget about your arms, but you really want to develop your legs, right? Because that's what's responsible for making you run. That's what we're talking about here. Development is to kind of get more specific and kind of guide your way to the goal that you're trying to get at. So as organisms and cells develop, they become more specific in what they're able to accomplish. And mature organisms have undergone growth and development to meet the needs of whatever their species is. So just like a track athlete has exercised to the point to get better at running, so have organisms to get a specific food source or to inhabit a certain place. That's how they mature, that's how they develop. So let's take a look at what we learned. First off, relate biology to your daily life. Well, what have you had for breakfast, lunch, or dinner today? I guarantee you something on that list was living at some point. Okay? You depend on that for food. And if you take a deep breath, you're breathing in oxygen. That oxygen just didn't happen to be there. It's because plants put it in the atmosphere for us. All right, so that's a characteristic of living things. And if we understand that we're kind of dependent on other things, understanding our own body is important, yeah, but understanding how other things help us to survive, that's even more important. So we got to start to understand that life isn't something that just happens separately. We're interdependent on one another. What are the characteristics of living things? Well, there are 7, right? There's cellular organization, reproduction, heredity, metabolism, homeostasis, responsiveness, and growth and development. There's our 7. 7. All right, so what does the hierarchy of life mean? Remember, that's where we talked about the building blocks. Started with atoms. Atoms form molecules, molecules form macromolecules, macromolecules form organelles. Organelles form cells. Cells are the first stop on the hierarchy of life that have all 7 of the characteristics that we just named. From cells, we go to tissues. Tissues make up organs. Organs make up organ systems. Organ systems make up organisms. And finally, the difference between metabolism and homeostasis. Homeostasis is the ability to maintain that internal environment. We do that through metabolic function. So metabolic or metabolism is sort of the avenue, the thing that we use to maintain homeostasis. Growth and development are the changing and the getting larger or getting more specific. Reproduction is the creation of new organisms. Okay, so that is your review of the science of life. That is our intro to biology for your e-biology teacher. Come back here often to check for other podcasts. The next one we're going to do is the themes of biology, the things we commonly run into. All right, see you then.